I think if I had guests in my house and I was putting out a plate of kale, everybody to take some from, people would be more inclined to go back for seconds if they had this. And remember, this is all the same variety of kale. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and today I'm in the kitchen and I'm talking about cooking kale and different ways to prepare it. And specifically, I'm talking about summer kale. So everyone that grows kale, if you've been doing it for any length of time or you've done some reading about it, you understand that it tastes better in the fall than it does in the summer. And often people will say it tastes better after a frost, and it does. What they don't say is it doesn't taste as good in the summer. And this is problematic because your kale's growing in June, July, August, right? That sort of thing, right? Where I am, it begins to become harvestable in July and August. But for me, it doesn't really start as a cooked, I'm talking about a cooked vegetable here. It doesn't start to taste good, really good, until late September, October, November. That's when the kale is at its best. But you've got all kinds of kale growing in your garden in July and August. Summer kale. So this video is about summer kale. And the question I'm exploring here is, why does your summer kale not taste as good, and what to do about it? And the simplest explanation for summer kale not tasting as good as fall kale, to put it that simple, or post-frost kale, is that during the summer your kale is being attacked by all kinds of different pests, right? You've got slugs, snails, and various kinds of caterpillars, butterflies that lay eggs and make caterpillars. And so your kale's being attacked in the summer by those things. And so your kale is changing its body chemistry. It's not really doing this, consciously. Well, this is something you could argue, but the kale's body chemistry is one way during the summer, right? It's increasing its bitterness in the summer. It's doing what it can to protect itself from those predators, right? From the things that eat it in the summer. And there's different arguments you can make about how that mechanism works, but the reality is that it tastes better in the fall, doesn't taste as good in the summer. It's more bitter in the summer. The taste is more sharp. It just does not taste as good. But you have to harvest it during the summer. I mean, it's growing. It's got successive layers of leaves, and the lower leaves, if you don't harvest them, they lose their color and they just become snail food, slug food, and so on and so forth. So you need to be eating it in July, in August, but it doesn't taste as good, and you have to somehow convince your family to use up this kale because it's good for you, and so on and so forth. So in this video, what I'm going to do is try cooking kale 3 or 4 different ways. 3 different ways or 4 different ways? 1, 2, 3. 3 different ways. And we're going to do a little comparison to see which approach achieves the best flavor. That is to say, minimizes the, and this all depends on your palate. Some people don't even notice this, right? This all depends on your palate. Everybody's different. If you take some people, if you put them in a blind taste test and you give them vegetarian hot dog, chicken hot dog, beef hot dog, they can't tell the difference, right? And there's other people that can distinctly tell the difference. That's palate, right? Just like some people can, see, can read text from a further distance than others. So we all have a different capacity to engage the exterior world through our senses, right? So some people have like a superpower. They can just taste things better than other people, right? I mean, some people are just unbelievably fussy, but bearing that aside, there's some people that just can taste things that other people can't taste. So holding all those things equal and using my taste buds, because this is my video and I'm going to be your guinea pig to try these different ways. I'm going to cook cook kale 3 different ways. And I'm using the same kind of kale. This is the blue Scotch curly kale from my garden. This is the kind of kale you typically get from a grocery store, okay? And how we prep this, you can cook and use the stems, but I'm not doing that here, is you just take your kale and you shuck it like that, right? So that's how I've prepared all the kale here. I'm leaving this, you can cook and use the stems, and there's different ways you can do that, and that's a whole nother video, a whole nother topic, but that's what you can do, right? So that's how you prep it. But what I've done is I shuck the kale off the stems, and I put it in the sink, and I rinsed it and washed it. Okay, so that's how I prepared all of this kale. Now, according to suggestions and theories about some people that some people present, this kale has been prepared one way, where I took the kale, I shucked it off the stems, I chopped it up, I washed it, and then I took the kale and squeezed it and squished it and smushed it and then washed it again. There's one argument for how that will actually improve the flavor of the kale, just from the way that the kale, you know, just the way that kale, to avoid getting overly technical, this changes the way the kale tastes. You wash it, you cut it up, chop it up, wash it, smush it with your hands, squeeze it like that, bruise it, right? And then you wash it again, right? That's one theory. So that's one way we're going to prepare. We're going to prepare all this kale the same way in terms of cooking it on the stove. But that's one way to prep it, okay? So that's what we've done here. Another thing we're going to do here is take the kale and pour boiling water over it, okay? So that we're sort of a kind of quick, easy blanching approach, right? We're going to put some hot water on the kale and let it sit like that for a minute or two. Okay, so that's what we're going to do with this kale right here. All right. So let's just use this about this amount. Okay, we got a bowl like this. Throw it in here. Okay, and we got some hot boiling water that we prepared in the kettle. And we're going to cover the kale with the hot boiling water. So this is, in a sense, a way of blanching the kale. We're going to let it sit in the boiling water for a minute or two. Sure, by preparing it this way, we're losing some of the nutritional value of the kale. But if nobody in your family wants to eat the kale, it really doesn't matter how nutritious it is, right? If people aren't eating it, they're not getting the nutrition, so there's not much you can do about that. So we need to make it tasty, right? Third way is we're going to take the kale, cut it up, and I've got some water boiling on the stove. I'm going to immerse it in salted, boiling water. So I'm going to blanch it. Right? I'm going to blanch the kale. I'm going to immerse it in salted, boiling water on the stove for 2 minutes. Okay, that's how I'm going to cook this kale here. And the argument is that, you know, whatever is in the kale that's bitter is going to go into the water, and we're going to lose it that way. So I'll just take this off the stove for a minute so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to immerse this kale. Remember, this has all been cut and washed and everything, right? I'll put that in there, put it back on the stove, and put a lid on it. Where's my lid? That'll do. Put a lid on it for 2 minutes, okay? All right, so we've got kale prepared 3 ways prior to cooking. And the way I'm going to cook this kale, all of the kale, is I'm going to toss it around in a saucepan with some olive oil, some salt, and pepper for about 2 minutes. That's how I'm going to cook it all. Right? So I've got the kale that was cut up and washed, squished, and washed again and left to sit for about an hour or so, right? All right, there's some literature that suggests this is a good way to prepare it. I got this kale here that I've just soaking in boiling water, which is a pretty quick way to do it. Of course, we're going to lose some of the nutritional value of the kale by virtue of this. And of course, this is all cooked kale, right? None of this is raw kale. So if you're a person that likes kale salad, this is a different sort of angle on the whole kale thing. But really, kale salad, when you buy it in the grocery store, it's baby kale. It's harvested at a certain point, and a lot of what's in that bag of your kale salad is not kale, right? You've got kale, you've got Brussels sprouts, you've got broccoli, you've got all kinds of different things. You've got nuts, different sorts of seeds, you've got fruit, and then you've got the whatever sauce and sugar and all that stuff that goes with it, right? So your idea, you say, I like kale, but what you like is kale salad bought in a bag from a grocery store with a bunch of stuff, right? So if you actually had raw kale that you grew in your backyard, it's not going to taste the same as the stuff you buy at the store in a bag prepared like that. And that's a shock a lot of people have to deal with, right? They say they like kale and they have a garden and they grow some kale and they eat it and they're like, ugh, I don't like that. Well, now you're eating real kale, right? So sure, there's different ways you can eat that as a salad and so on and so forth, but I'm just talking about kale as a cooked green. And I have found over the course of time that in the summer, we eat it, but we don't like it as much as the fall kale, right? Once we start getting frost, which usually happens at some point in September where I live, Nova Scotia, Canada, the kale and everything in that category, cole crops, crucifers, right? Brassicas, everything starts tasting better in the fall. But you've got it in the summer and you've got to use it. If you don't use it, it just goes bad. So you got to do something with it, right? So here we've got 3 different ways. I think everything's been working for long enough. So what I'm going to do is just strain these different things out and then I'm going to prepare them. So stay with me. We'll hang on in a minute and we'll get back to you. I'm going to run this through a strainer. I'm going to run the kale that's on the oven through a strainer, and then we're going to cook the 3 different kinds of prepared kale, and then we're going to do a taste test to see which way tastes the best. Okay, so hang with me here. Okay, so this is just, when I cook kale, I normally add all kinds of things to it, but we're just going to keep this simple for comparison basis, okay? So I got a little bit of olive oil, tablespoon of olive oil, and we're going to throw, this is the kale that was just cut, smushed, washed, drained, and that's it. Okay, so this has not been subjected to any heat at this point in time. We're going to put it in this wok with a little bit of olive oil. Okay? Pinch of salt, pinch of pepper. That's it, nothing fancy. Normally when I cook kale, I like to add garlic and all kinds of stuff, all right? But this is all we're going to do here. Toss it around for a minute or 2 to get the salt and pepper and olive oil, uniformly distributed throughout the kale. Now I got a little lid here, and I got about a tablespoon of water just, in the lid, right? So I'm going to put that on there to steam it, okay? So we'll just cover it like that and let it go for about 2 minutes. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes. All right, so it's been 2 minutes. Bring that down, move that around. I stirred it once during that time, okay? So after 1 minute, I took the lid off, gave it a bit of a stir. This has been welted down, and let's just call that done, okay? So that's our washed, cut, scrunched, washed, and washed again kale, okay? Put that one aside. Okay, now we're going to do the one that was just soaked in boiling water, right? So this is that kale. It was just water from the kettle. Oh, we'll throw that in there. Again, pinch of salt, dash or whatever you want to call it, dash of pepper. All right. Now, again, normally this is something I would cook with garlic, right? But garlic, cook your kale with garlic and bacon is good. I make a pesto from garlic scapes. That goes really good with kale. But anyway, here we're just doing olive oil, salt, and pepper. All right, so we got that mixed up a little bit. Splash of water. Put the lid on. 2 minutes. We're back in 2 minutes. All right, so it's been 2 minutes. This is the one that was just doused in boiling water from a kettle. Put that one aside. Looks nice and green, all right? Now, let's do the one that was immersed in another little splash of olive oil. Couple teaspoons there. This is the kale that was immersed in boiling water. This was blanched, basically. Blanched for 2 minutes in boiling water. The water dumped out. Same approach. Dash of salt. Dash of pepper. Little olive oil in there. Right? Turn the temperature up. A little bit of water. Let's toss that around for a minute or two just to get the salt and pepper distributed around the surface area. In the interest of science, right? Get the salt and pepper well distributed throughout the kale. There's a piece of grass there. You don't want that. All right, we got some good heat going there. Just put the lid on. A splash of water on the lid. All right, so same approach for each. So we'll be back in 2 minutes. All right, so here we are with our 3 different kinds of kale. This is the first one we did, and you're gonna have to excuse me for the duration of this video here, from here on in, because if I've got kale stuck in my teeth, that's just a sacrifice I'm making for science. So this is the kale that we just chopped up, squished, and then washed really well, okay? So we'll try that. This is a way of preparing it that's recommended by many people. Now, bearing in mind that I like kale, this tastes all right. It doesn't taste offensive. It's very fibrous. Yeah, this would go with a meal, but I can tell you, if someone has been eating kale for years, a fall kale is much better than this, okay? This is all right, it's acceptable, but it's not great. You know, if you gave this to guests came over to your house and this was one of your beautiful looking, nice green dish, people would be drawn to it, and then they'd eat some, and if they're, health conscious people, they might have some more, but a lot of people wouldn't go back for seconds. Let's just put it that way, okay? That's from a guy that loves kale. Now here's the one. I still got that kale. I'm still chewing. So I'm still chewing that kale. Right? Let me have some water here to sort of get it down. So it's very fibrous. Let's just put it that way. It's much more tender in fall after good frost. All right. Now this is the one that was soaked in boiling water for 2 minutes. Okay, so it's a pretty easy prep. Chop it up, soak it in boiling water, dump the water out, right, and so on and so forth. And then just sauteed with olive oil, salt, and pepper. I have to say, this is less bitter than that, and slightly less, it's still fibrous, but it's slightly less fibrous, I have to say. Sure, when we poured the boiling water over it, we dumped the boiling water down the sink, we lost something. But texture-wise, this is more agreeable than that. Flavor-wise, this is more agreeable than that. Now, again, I'm not talking about fall kale. This is summer kale. Flavor-wise, this is more agreeable than that. I have to admit it. Okay? All right. Now, this is the one that was blanched in boiling water for 2 minutes. Prepared the same way. So all these are prepared the same way. Let's try this out. The steam's still coming off of it. All right, let me just rinse my mouth out. Very visceral video here with swallowing and chewing and so on and so forth. Cleanse my palate. Okay, so this is the one that was blanched, then sauteed with olive oil, salt, and pepper. A good test here, okay? I have to say, this is the most processed kale. Arguably, this kale is less nutritious than this and this. But I have to admit, this is better. I think if I had guests in my house and I was putting out a plate of kale, everybody to take some from, people would be more inclined to go back for seconds if they had this. And remember, this is all the same variety of kale. Blue Scots curly kale, I believe is the variety. I'll double check, because varieties matter as well. Someone's going to say, well, I have this kind of kale and it's the greatest kale in the world. Well, that may be the case, that the kale you have is the greatest kale in the world. Or you just have a palate that can't tell bitter kale from non-bitter kale, right? You have to bear that in mind, right? Now, be willing to accept the fact that I used to work with a guy, he regularly ate raw green beans as a snack. And these are ones he bought from the grocery store. He didn't grow them in his garden, he bought them from a grocery store. And I have never eaten grocery store green beans that taste good. I only like them from my garden, and I only like green beans cooked. If I eat a raw green bean, it's because I'm out in my garden and I'm really hungry, and I know if I eat a raw green bean, it's like a hunger suppressant. If I eat a couple of raw green beans, it staves off hunger for about an hour or so, right? So, but generally speaking, I like my green beans cooked. This guy was fine with eating them raw, so sure, it's possible that every time he bought beans from the grocery store, they were the greatest, most delicious beans in history. Or he just did not have the palate to tell the difference, right? He could not detect. I mean, all of these things, they have some degree of what's called oxalic acid in them, right? It's a chemical that these greens produce, and it helps those greens protect themselves from different kinds of pests. And from a kale's point of view, you're a pest because you're eating it, right? So anyway, I have to say that the blanched one, in terms of texture, and even in terms of flavor, this is less bitter than that. And this one, all right, I don't know if you can see that in the camera here. This one's less bitter than that, and this one is less bitter than that. So the difference in the equation is the amount of heat the vegetable was exposed to, right? Blanched, immersed in hot water, and just cut up and washed a couple times. So, take it for what it is, but if you're a new gardener and you're growing kale in your garden and you picked a whole bunch and you went and cooked it and you weren't happy with the way it tasted, summer kale does not taste as good as fall kale. And when I say fall kale, I mean kale that's been exposed to a frost. And so If you like it the way it is, fine. Don't do any of this stuff. It's not worth, why would you? But if you're finding that the flavor of your summer kale is a little bit offensive, and accepting that there's different varieties of kale and some taste better than others and so on and so forth. But this is all the same kale here. And I have to tell you, of these 3 different approaches, and I left out just cutting the kale and cooking it because it's even worse, okay? In terms of texture, in terms of flavor, this is the more agreeable approach. So take it for what it is. Now you can agree with me or disagree, whatever. Please put your comments in the comment box. Maybe I'll do a follow-up video. But yeah, I hope that was useful. If it was, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.